Hello, are you here to debate?
Hey, yes, I am.
All right, what's your name, major pronouns?
Chase 36, and I don't really use pronouns.
Can you tell me that sentence again without using a pronoun to tell me that you don't use pronouns?
Chase 36, man.
Okay, man isn't a pronoun in the English language, so I'll assume you go by he, him.
Sure.
Okay, there we go. Chase, what topic did you want to debate about?
Let's debate on trends.
Trans what?
So I want to set forth some claims initially.
Okay.
So sex and gender are synonymous. Personalities are fluid. And gender dysphoria is better described in a subset of psychology called personality psychology, which causes less societal friction.
I would disagree with all of those, except maybe personality is fluid, sure, but I would disagree with the other two. So I would say sex and gender may be used synonymously, but that does not make them synonymous. And I would say gender dysphoria works better when we're analyzing gender psychology issues.
Yeah, so I think a good way to understand an issue is to look at the treatment. So if sex and gender are separate, why are the only medical procedures biological in nature for trans?
Because gender dysphoria is about the biological sex not aligning with your gender identity.
Yeah, but the point is that they're intrinsically linked, right?
Yes, sex and gender are linked. I've never said they weren't. I would say they're not synonymous though. They are describing two separate things, but those two separate things happen to have a linking in the human brain.
I think this causes a lot of confusion in the sense of, anytime there's a new theory that's put out, it needs to explain or give some sort of clarity that doesn't already exist. The problem with trans ideology is it creates a lot of confusion, right? It takes simple things about what is a woman and what is a man, and it makes it difficult to answer for a lot of people, right? Like that's the sort of conservative gotcha point.
What is people being confused by a topic matter for the validity of the topic?
Well, because you already have an existing framework that explains it clearly where there's not under misunderstandings, right? Where you can say personalities are fluid, you can be a feminine man or you can be a masculine woman, or a million different variations of the two. But I think
I would just argue, wait, really quickly, I would just argue that the existence of trans people means that the original understanding was incomplete.
Yeah, but I guess my argument would even be that why you would need to call it trans when you could stick with the traditional frameworks that tend to explain it more clear without the societal friction. Right?
What does trans mean?
It's actually a great question. What does trans mean? Is it, to me, I see a biological sex, and then you just say, well, I don't align with those traditional personality traits that would be associated in mass, like the generic descriptors that we use for the sexes.
Yeah, so when I'm asking you what transgender means, I'm not asking like what you think it means, right? Like we have a generally understood like at least from a psychological aspect what it means to be transgender and what transgender means. So I don't know why it would be a confusing thing to not know.
Okay, so and to get some terms straight, right? So just the generic question: what is a woman?
I would say a woman is an adult human whose gender identity aligns with their schema on the female sex.
Okay, so it's interesting that you can't define that though without using a biological term, right? Sex, without including that in there.
Why is that interesting?
Well, because then we try to draw the distinctions.
Those distinctions would still exist.
I think when we look at the application of this in real life, and you look at the societal friction that it causes, I think it's directly
hold on. I don't give it. Societal friction doesn't matter, right? It wouldn't matter if something is correct or not because it causes societal friction, right? Slavery caused societal friction to the point that we had a civil war. This doesn't mean that like the side of people saying slavery should be abolished were wrong. even though it started a civil war because of societal friction. So it's just sort of a non-argument, right? You said specifically that me referencing you, well, you didn't make a point, but my definition referencing sex, I don't know what the issue is with the definition referencing sex when I've already said sex and gender have a linking. So it's like,
Right.
I don't understand what the issue would be.
I think the point of societal friction, it's not just the friction itself. It's what is the foundation of it, what underpins the friction. And so the way that a lot of people tend to see this topic, I do think that this will be an issue that dies over the years, is that you're telling me the sky is green when I'm clearly looking up, right? It's like there's a difference between feeling like something and physically being that thing.
Well, yeah, this would be the problem is you're presupposing that my side of the argument is wrong instead of having the conversation to see which side of the argument is correct. You're just presupposing. So you're going, this doesn't work because my presupposition about the topic is that these things are not like a trans woman can't be a woman. That's not really telling me anything. That's telling me you don't believe that. Sure. But why? If you're saying I don't believe it just because I don't believe it, or I don't believe it because like this is what I see, like that's not really an answer to the question.
Okay, no, sure. So essentially, I think the way the trans issue is being framed is less clear. It provides less clarity than existing systems we've already had. So, for example, gender dysphoria that is described in personality psychology. So that's the question, right? Like, what does trans add clarity on that an existing, framework, an existing study doesn't, right? Anytime there's a new theory, it's got to add something or provide some sort of clarity and not muddy the waters.
Yeah, I'd say understanding of trans identity is 100% clarifies things, and we've seen this on both a sociological level, a psychological level, and a neuroscience level. So you keep saying that there's no clarity here, but you just keep saying there's no clarity without, substantiating that there is no clarity.
Well, okay, so here's the thing, right? No one would disagree, regardless of your politics, that personalities are fluid. People have different personalities, and it's ranging, right? What people disagree on, where the line is drawn, is that someone can feel like a man and therefore they are a man, or someone can feel like a woman and therefore they are a woman, right? So that is where the clarity is lacking in that ideology, but is clearly explained and agreed upon with existing frameworks.
Yeah. So can you do me a favor? Can you define personality?
Sure. Descriptors about oneself.
Okay. I would argue that can't be personality. That's too broad to be a definition of personality, because I could say like I'm a Christian and that's a descriptor of myself, but that my personality wouldn't be Christian, right? It would be an aspect of who I am, right. But like I would argue that that's not a personality trait. Sure, but that's why I'm asking. That's why I'm asking if you could give a less vague definition of personality.
I don't really think you can. If personalities are fluid, because it's such a broad thing, it's hard to get more specific. I mean, I'm sure there's a more specific definition that would still be broad enough to capture it. But off the top of my head, I mean, I think that's totally fine. Any other thing that you would describe, you can name a label, but guess what? Those are defined by descriptors themselves, right?
So, okay. So let me then ask you, what do you believe gender to be?
Again, I think it's a synonym for sex. I think it's clearly defined in the same way. If I say I'm a male, there's a biological attachment to that, and sort of definition there, but there's also descriptors that are tied to it generically. So people think generically about a man. They might think of someone who is a provider, someone who might be a fighter, confident, protector, those type of things. Now they're generic, right? Not everyone is that thing.
Sure. The reason why I would argue that sex and gender are not synonymous, like for the sheer get-go, is because humans aren't the only ones with sex. If sex and gender are synonymous, then every creature that has sex is synonymous with gender, and we know this to not be the case, right? I wouldn't call a female horse a woman, right? And they wouldn't meet the woman clarifier when we're talking about women. There is more than just sex when it comes to gender as well. Gender is also a clarification of species. It's also a clarification of age. And age, especially when we're talking about gender, is more of a social concept, at least in the traditional definition of like what a man or what a woman is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the age and maturity and stuff here that's tied to it. Typically when people are using that language, historically, they're not conveying some sort of socioeconomic status, right? They're just saying it's tied to them being, if I go to the doctor, right, and it's like, are you male or female? You could essentially just substitute those out with man or woman in a sense.
Yeah, I'm not. Again, my argument at the start was yes, people may use them synonymously, but that doesn't mean that the concepts are synonymous. Gender specifically refers to social and cultural differences, whereas sex refers to the biological differences.
See, I would disagree in the sense that language is only important insofar as it captures the way that people are using it, right? Like language are just sounds that we use to represent reality. So if you're defining a term in a way that isn't mostly used, it's almost useless, right?
Well, no, I would disagree. I would say language just matters for like communication. So when somebody says, "Hey, I'm a male," and somebody else hears it and they just understand that you mean man, right? Or vice versa, you can still be wrong about your way of using these terms. Or I won't say wrong. You can still conflate these terms and use these terms synonymously. It's just that people kind of have a general acceptance that what you really mean is X or what you really mean is Y. I don't think this diminishes the purpose that when we're talking about gender and sex, that these two, at least on an academic level, mean two completely different things. We lurk about these things, especially when we're analyzing psychology and sociology. We're going to analyze these two in completely different ways.
Sure. So if we look at the actual effects, right? So I think this is sort of important. Instead of just arguing semantics in a sense, is what is the effect that we see in the world, from trans ideology? And so what I see is a lot of confusion. I see that a simple question of what is a man and what is a woman stumps a lot of leftists.
Well,
whether it's
no, hold on. Whoa. That's an instantly bad faith. That's an instantly bad faith argument, because it's not that it stumps them. You disagree with their predication on what a woman is. They're not stumped. You just have a disagreement, right? They can answer the question. You disagree with the answer. That's different from them not being able to answer.
For example, you answered the question, even though I may disagree. When I'm saying stumping, I'm talking about clearly when people don't even know what to say, that they lock up, right? If you ask, can a man get pregnant? And,
Yes.
a lot of people lock up. Is it because of the lack of clarity that this provides, or is it just because they fear the repercussions?
No, it's because they know that it's a bad faith. They know it's a bad faith question, right? Because no matter what way they answer, you're not going to accept their answer, right? Like if somebody was saying to me, can men get pregnant? I would say, yes, absolutely, 100%. And then it gets into, well, see, you didn't know the answer to that question. So a lot of people aren't going to answer it because they know it's a lose-lose. Either they say yes, and you go, well, you didn't actually know the answer. They say no, and then you go, well, see, we were right. Like it's a lose-lose. So it's just better to not answer the question.
Well, I don't think that's good. I think if you've got a good argument, I don't think you have to run from some of the questions that would come from that, right? Like, I don't think there should be any sort of...
As someone who's been doing debates for 5 years, wait, Chase, I just want to point something out. As someone who's been doing debates for 5 years, it doesn't matter how perfect your argument is if you're talking about somebody that doesn't care about the argument, right? I talk to tons of people a day who cannot provide me a good argument for their side, and they still go, well, see, I won this debate, right? Like a bad faith question is going to be bad faith in its inception.
But I still think it is important to articulate that in an argument. And so, I think that's the thing. I mean, look, from the right's perspective, they look at this kind of thing. I use the analogy of like, I'm looking up at the sky and you're telling me it's green. They use those kind of questions to demonstrate the insanity of the ideology, right? Like that's the gotcha.
Except there is no insanity to the ideology.
Because if we're discussing, you're not going to have a gotcha question for, say, evolution in a sense. If we're discussing other like fundamental, theories that are rooted in scientific fact. I think, again, what should be the most fundamental important thing to consider at the end of the day is just facts over feelings, over
Okay, well then
empathy can go too
hold on.
far.
Let's go with facts over feelings for a second. Do you believe
Yeah.
that trans women are women?
No.
Okay. What is the necessary condition that all women must possess in order to meet the qualifier of woman?
Biological sex of female.
Okay.
I think it's pretty cut and
What
dry.
does it mean to be a female?
Literally biological chromosomes. That's it. That's the only
Great.
thing.
What does that mean? What chromosomes must I possess in order to be female?
Wait, what do you mean? What does that mean?
You said in order to be female, it's about your biological chromosomes. So which type of chromosomal pairing must I possess in order to be a female?
You must be XX.
Okay, great. Can you see the screen still? Can you see the stream?
Hang on, let me pull it up. Yep.
Okay. So here's a medical case literally about a woman with pure 46XY karyotyping. So what is she?
Okay. So when we're saying this, it's not that there's going to be some genetic discrepancies, right?
Except, hold on. I asked you specifically, friend, I asked you specifically for a necessary condition. A necessary condition can have 0 exceptions. So if it is necessary that in order to be a woman, you must possess XX chromosomes, but there are women who do not possess XX chromosomes. They may possess XY chromosomes. For instance, somebody with Swyer syndrome, who is a female that possesses a 46XY karyotyping, and you would still consider them women because they would still be women, they would still be females with the condition that gives them XY chromosomes, then it is not necessary to possess XX chromosomes to be a woman. Therefore, I can say that because XX chromosomes are not necessary, trans people don't have XX chromosomes, they can fit into the category now, because that is a non-necessary condition. Necessary conditions can have 0 exceptions. Once you add an exception, it breaks the condition.
Well, no, I don't think so. I think you could just not quantify the person as a biological female. And why not give it another label?
Okay, so just confirming, this person who has 46XY karyotyping, who is able to give birth to a child, because that's what this is on the screen. It's a case study of the pregnancy and delivery in a patient with pure 46XY karyotyping. They're not female.
The necessary condition was the XY chromosomes. That's it.
Okay, so this person is not a female in your worldview. Even though medically they're considered a female.
Look, I feel like it's just ridiculous to argue if we said how many, okay, humans typically have how many limbs? And we say 2 limbs. You say, gotcha. There's some people that are.
Do you notice the word you use? Do you notice the word you use there? Typically. I could say all day, humans typically have 2 limbs, but when I use the phrase typically, what I'm saying is that there are going to be humans that do not have 2 limbs. So I could say women typically have XX chromosomes, but that is going to leave open that some women have XY chromosomes, which could be women with Swyer syndrome and or trans women who also have XY chromosomes. You didn't say typically because I asked you for a necessary. If you're going to say that there's a category and that category is exclusionary, there must be a necessary condition set on the category. Otherwise, it by nature cannot be exclusionary.
I feel like that answer is more of a gotcha and not.
It's not a gotcha. It's an argument.
Practice. I feel like everyone walks around discussing things in general terms of what applies to most people, right? No one says if I ask you how many limbs a person has, do you say, well, it's difficult?
No, they would say typically. They would say typically 2 or typically 4. My thing is, it's not a gotcha. It's an argument. Right? My argument is that there are no necessary conditions that would bar trans women from the category of woman. Your response to that argument would need to be laying out to me a necessary condition that all cisgender women possess and 0 anybody else possesses. Nobody else would possess this. All people who are women would possess it. No people who are not women would possess it. I'm going to tell you that condition doesn't exist. So therefore, the category cannot be exclusionary.
There's an easy answer to this, which is that we stay with the original condition and we just put this person in a different category, and it solves all.
Okay, what's the third category?
It have to be this crazy thing where we have to now expand the condition, or we have to expand the definition.
Humans are male and female. What's the third category?
Sure, there's a third category. Sure.
What is it?
Right, because there is genetic diversity.
What is the third category? What is the third category?
Whatever we want to call it, you can call it transgender, but they would have to meet that same condition of having, atypical.
So what you're saying
chromosomes
is there would
and
need to
still-
be like a litany of different, we would need to, instead of, what you're saying is simpler, instead of allowing trans women into the category of women, we now need an infinite regress of categories to categorize an infinite regress of human genetic anomalies and or variances with human sexual development. I think one of these is way simpler than the other, and it's not the latter.
I think again, I would argue against that. Just looking at the effect that we have. I mean, look, if it was easily understandable, easily digestible, and true, you wouldn't have all the uproar that you have in society. Our society is not just full of bigots. I don't know anybody on the right that cares how a man dresses.
I'm not talking about this. That's not the argument. None of that has to do with the argument being made, right? We're talking. Your initial claim was that, hey, this thing, categorizing trans women this way is going to confuse the masses. And now when we've boiled down the argument, your way to unconfuse the masses is if I go to the doctor's office, I now have an infinite amount of check boxes for every single infinite variant in sexual development to label me as some different thing. Because human development is incredibly varied when it comes to the way we develop sexually. If your argument is about cohesion and stuff being less confusing, the argument you've laid out is not less confusing.
I mean, I just disagree. I don't think that there's going to be that much genetic variation that's going to create a list at a doctor's office of 1,000, right? I think it's.
What do you disagree? You disagree on the basis of what?
So statistically, right? How many people are born with the genetic disorder that you mentioned earlier?
With Swyer syndrome?
Is that where the woman had an XY chromosome?
Swyer syndrome can relate to that. It's typically 1 in 80,000 are born with Swyer syndrome. So that means there are quite literally millions of people on this planet who have Swyer syndrome.
Right. So I would say that I don't really know how many other genetic variations of that you can have, considering there's X and Y chromosomes in that. So like, I don't think it opens
Well, if we're just looking at chromosomal variations, you're going to have XX, XY, XO, XXX, XXY, XYY. Like there's a ton of variations. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think we're falling into the slippery slope where, if we have to make
slope?
Exception for this one, then now we have to then it's a slippery slope.
No, I think you fundamentally don't understand how a slippery slope fallacy has to work, because I quite literally labeled out how your response to me when I said, what would we do about somebody who is female but has XY chromosomes because they have Swyer syndrome? So they have the activated, they have a Y chromosome. However, they still have they would still have a female reproductive system. Your response was create another category. So my response to that is, how many categories, what must we create in order to fit in everybody with a genetic variance that would result in them having a different making than what you've said is woman and what you've determined as men. That's not a slippery slope. That is quite literally logically bringing your position to its next point and showing the absurdity of that. So I'm not sure if you know what a slippery slope fallacy would be.
Well, I think the point is that there's not, would there even be that much genetic diversity in that sense to?
Yes. How many? Sure. How many Yeah, sure. Do you know how many intersex conditions exist in human?
No, I don't.
Okay. So far, we're up to 30, and we find new ones, right? So far, we're up to about 30 intersex conditions. So that would mean we'd need at least 30 variations when I go to the doctor to check man and woman, because you said we've needed to make new categories for these people that wouldn't fit into what you've classified as man and what you've classified as woman. So how many check boxes do we need? And what would these other categories now be?
Actually, here's a great way to describe it. I think it's you say male, female, other, and there you go.
Male, female, other.
And why is that, right? Like, it's not just because you're dismissing, right? Because I can see the other as being sort of dismissive. It's reflective of like the actual statistical. So, most people are going to be male or female, right? Like 99.9% or whatever it is, the vast majority are going to fall into one of those two categories. So if you don't, then it is a genetic anomaly, and that would fit into the other box. And so, okay, we don't have to have 1,000
So the
checkboxes.
issue with this becomes the fact that intersex as a scientific label, right? And this is where we get into people who are using the science versus not using the science. Intersex and these conditions are conditions that affect males and females. So what actually is you are giving a fundamental mischaracterization of what it means to be female. And instead of adjusting your characterization of female to fit the current science, right, the current science in terms of biology, you're saying instead we should create an other category, which I think is just an absurd position.
It's not me saying that. It's nature, right? It's like nature.
Well, no, nature would agree with biology. Just FYI, nature would agree with the biological. So nature would say that a female that has Swyer syndrome is still female. You're the one saying that she would be some other thing because of the way you've classified sex. But science doesn't simply classify sex by chromosomal makeup. You have genotypic sex, which looks at the way your chromosomes are amplified. But when we talk about sex, there are I think it's nine qualifiers for sex in humans. And even breaking that down further, there's also phenotypic sex, which looks at a completely different way that we classify humans sexually. So like,
yeah, but the fact that there's a difference to begin with is the point. They're not female full stop. They're female with a condition, right?
Most important. Yeah, we're gonna see a lot of people who are not female full stop. Yeah. So this doesn't defeat my argument, because I would just say trans women are female, not fully, right? I would just add trans women into that category, right? Because if you can't tell me what condition is necessary, right, then anybody can fit into that category. If they meet sufficient conditions, anyone can fit into that category. If they you would need a necessary, and you don't have one. In order to have an exclusionary category, you must have a necessary condition.
I say the biological definition is what makes sense.
But you didn't give me the biological definition of female. You gave me a definition you've given, but I can read you directly out of a neuroscience textbook how they classify female, and it is different from the way you classify female.
What is the definition that you're saying?
Oh yeah, sure. Let me pull it up. I gotta pull the book up. Give me just 1 second to pull up my source document and find the book. Oh shit!
So
save that.
This does get a little bit of a caveat. So has 2 X chromosomes, ovaries, and other associated reproductive anatomy.
Yeah, those would be sufficient conditions to fit the category. Not necessary conditions to fit the category. Those would be conditions that are sufficient. That if these are things you have, that's sufficient to fit in here.
Sure. So I think, I think that's fine. Like, I'd be fine with expanding my initial definition to include those other 2 conditions, right? Well, but I think it's associated.
Well, here's the problem. If we're saying that you now have multiple necessary conditions, that means all of those must be present in order to be female. Do you believe all of those conditions must be present in order to be female? Or do you believe that I can have some of these conditions, in which case this would be sufficient, and sufficient conditions aren't enough to bar someone from a category. They're just saying what is sufficient to be in that category, not that it's necessary to be in that category.
I do think that the chromosome argument is probably the easiest one to go with, right? Because it's still measurable, right? I mean, even a trans person that goes through some sort of procedure, I mean, that's still, you can do a biological test.
Do you know what mosaicism is?
Say that again?
Do you know what mosaicism is?
No, I do not.
So humans can either have, it's either true mosaicism, or there's another one whose thing I forget. Mosaicism is basically saying that every cell in our body has sex chromosomes, right? So every cell in our body has a complete 46 chromosome makeup, except for sperm and egg, except for our gamete cells. But like a skin cell will have all 46 of your chromosomes. A blood cell will have all 46 of your chromosomes inside of the thing to bring up your like genetic spectrum. Mosaicism is talking about how some humans, and it's probably a lot more than we know because we don't do pure karyotyping for everybody that's born, is that humans can have a mix. So some humans have XX cells, some humans have XY cells, some humans have a split mix. So true mosaicism would be talking about people who have a 50-50 split. They have 50% of their cells are XX and 50% are XY. Would these people now be both man and woman? Would they be, what do we call these people? This is why saying that the split is just on chromosomes, it doesn't fully work. Now you can say typical, you can add that typical variant, and then that makes all of this wash away, you know? But if you don't add that typical, or I'm sorry, but if you do add that typical, trans people can fit into the category by just being the atypical.
Right, and I think that that's fine, right? But that would mean that they would be, again, there's a separation of categories. So then again, I would not say that they are a woman. I would say that they are other, or they are atypical.
Nope, they can fit into the category by being the atypical, right? So let me tell you what my necessary condition for being a woman is. The only thing that you must possess to be a woman is having a gender identity that aligns with your schema on the female sex. What this does is it classifies every person that is a woman into the category, and it bars every person that's not a woman outside of the category. It quite literally is the most accurate in terms of necessary conditions.
So, I mean, you could say that, but let's pivot to the real world effects of what this looks like in practice. And so what you end up with is, you know, the absurdity of including non-biological females in female sports, the obvious thing, right? Or you see the headlines all the time about it, you know, trans man or trans woman that wins and sets a record for something, which is
name me one of them. Can you name me one of them?
Can I give you the name of one? I mean, I'm sure I could look one up real quick.
Can you? Who are the trans women that are dominating in their sporting categories and setting all these records? I've not seen them. Okay, let's see. Achieved notable victories, women's sports. Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas never set a single record.
Transgender athlete to win an NCAA division.
Yep. So, well, hold on. We can go over Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas is actually one of my favorite examples. Leah Thomas played in the 2022 NCAA Division I National Championship. She won one single event, which was the 500-yard freestyle. She placed fifth place in the 200-yard freestyle and came in dead last in the 100-yard freestyle. And she set zero records. Her win was still 9 seconds behind the record set by a cisgender woman. So this instantly falls apart in your argument.
This is where I feel like we start losing good faith arguments here, where it's like, it's such a basic thing. Like, do we really have to go into this?
Yes, because if it's so basic, then it should be happening. Wait, if it's so basic, it should be happening. I should be able to see example on example on example of trans women who are consistently winning at their category without cisgender women beating them. Or I should see trans men unable to compete against cisgender men. But even that we don't see, because you have people like Patricio Manuel who are like undefeated in MMA or in boxing, who's a trans man who's undefeated against cis men, right? If it is the case that you have that it is so absurd to have these people in these sports because they're going to be doing this, we should see this. Instead, what we see is that the competition is kind of even, especially when we look at people like Leah Thomas, who wasn't even allowed to compete until she did 2 years on HRT.
So, okay, so this, again, right? Like, I could sit here and Google all these different stories and things, and we could go through each topic and talk about that. It's like, but, you know, or it's pretty easy to just look at every world record in every sports category and to see, is it held by men or women? So first of all, do you agree that there are clear advantages in sports between the biological sexes?
I would say there are advantages in sports that can typically be held by males, based on male physiological development, but I can also recognize that HRT does away with that advantage, hence why trans women are not setting records.
Wouldn't you agree that the advantage they have would also correlate to whenever they transitioned, right? Wherever did they go?
Yes, but almost every single sporting, like if you want to say we should let people transition sooner, I'm all for that. If you want to remove the biological advantage, because if you don't go through male puberty, you're not going to have that advantage. So like I could agree. We should just let trans women.
I'm honestly not making that argument. I'm just pointing out how there is a difference for when.
Yes, but again, typically 2 years on HRT, we're going to see that difference decrease, and that's what the evidence shows us, and that's what the science tells us.
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, you can say that, right? I mean, I think we get into the weeds with it, and I think that's where, you know, an easy solution here is you just create a different category and you put trans in there, and
how many trans athletes were playing? For instance, let's just go with college sports, right? How many collegiate trans athletes were there in 2024?
Probably not enough to create their own league.
So what should they do?
Honestly, and this is crazy. It's like, is it really that important that they have to have the ability to join one of these two groups? I mean, that's where it gets kind of crazy at some point, you know, between
because we specifically have laws in our country that say we can't bar people from competing based on gender. Like we literally have laws that say that. So yes, it is important that they're able to compete. And I'll give you the answer. There were 10 openly trans collegiate athletes in 2024.
Sure.
I think it's not an issue.
Again, we have existing frameworks. If there is any sort of unfair advantage to that, it just doesn't make sense to include that stuff in there. You know, it's like to be empathetic and to make someone feel welcomed, you know, you disenfranchise or you upset a large other group of people. And it's like, well, that doesn't equal either, right? It's like,
okay, well then let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question to fulfill that. So you're saying that it's unfair to cater to a small minority if you're going to upset a large minority. So do you agree? Would you agree that Ruby Bridges shouldn't have been allowed to segregate into that school because it upset a large majority of white people?
I'm not familiar with Ruby Bridges. Explain the scenario. I mean, I'm sure it's
you don't know who Ruby Bridges is. All right. Well, somebody paid to move on, and I think that's my cue. If you don't know who fucking Ruby Bridges is, Jesus Christ. What? What's up, everybody? Thanks for watching this video, and I want to give a special shout out to my YouTube members. Their names are on the side. Membership starts at $2.99 a month, and you get early access to videos, exclusive members-only videos, and access to the Red Mirror Media Discord server. Thank you again to my members, and thanks for watching.